Okay, let's unpack this. We've spent a fair bit of time tracing our ancestors through the 18th century, wading through wills, deeds, uh, those crumbling paper trails to piece together the story of Isaac DuBose and his family along the Santee River.
Right, the traditional stuff.
Exactly. But today, we're making a massive leap. We're stepping right out of the inkwell and into the laboratory.
A big jump.
It is. We're diving deep into the 21st century's most, I guess, revolutionary genealogical tool, DNA.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate validation system, isn't it? For so long, the question was always, does this paper trail prove a connection or does it just, suggest one?
Right. Is it correlation or causation almost?
Precisely. And now we actually have the ability to scientifically confirm those relationships. Sometimes we can trace lineage back hundreds, even thousands of years. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Wow.
But before we get into the, let's say, the genetic fingerprint of our specific family, we kind of have to start with the basics, the foundation piece of the puzzle.
Which is
The name itself, DuBose.
DuBose. Okay, yeah. It sounds quite distinctive, but I have a feeling that might be misleading, given how common some French surnames can turn out to be.
That's exactly the critical insight you need right at the start. The name DuBose, or its more common, older spelling, Dubois, B-W-A-H.
Ah, Dubois. Heard that one more often.
Right. It's what we call a toponymic surname. So if we trace it way back using resources like, say, Jeannicot's French dictionary from 1606,
1606, okay.
we find that Dubosc, Dudiosk, just means of the wood or from the forest.
Oh, so it's like the English names wood or forest or maybe Atwood, something location-based.
Exactly like that. If you lived near a big, noticeable stand of trees, maybe a particular wood people knew, you might become known as Dubosc. Simple as that.
So that implies.
It implies the name could have popped up independently in, dozens, maybe even hundreds of different places all across France and Western Europe.
Right. Anyone living near a woods could get that name.
Precisely. So the key takeaway here is just sharing the name DuBose or Dubois does not automatically mean you're related to our specific line, the one descending from Isaac.
Okay.
And that fact alone, that's the foundational problem that DNA really has to help us solve.
Okay, that raises a really critical methodological question then. If our goal is to pin down the unique genetic identity of our Isaac DuBose, the one who landed in South Carolina around 1686,
Yeah.
we first have to be absolutely sure we aren't accidentally, mixing things up or claiming connections to other families who just happen to share that same toponymic surname.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. The necessity of scientific proof here is paramount. We know for a fact there are these huge, very well-documented Dubois families in America.
Right.
And for centuries, traditional genealogists, they really tried desperately to link them to our South Carolina line, often using, flawed paper evidence or pretty circumstantial links.
Can you give us an example? Maybe a family that for a long time people just assumed was related, but then DNA came along and, blew that theory up.
Oh, definitely. The clearest example, and it really highlights the power of this technology, is the prominent Dubois family of New Paltz, New York.
New Paltz, okay. Upstate New York.
That's the one. This family descends from a Huguenot immigrant named Chrétien Dubois, Chrétien du B-W-A-H. And interestingly, he arrived in the New World right around the same time as our Isaac.
Huh. Okay, so you've got two Huguenot families.
Yep.
Same general surname or a variant of it.
Dubois, Dubosc, yeah.
Arriving almost simultaneously in America. I mean, the historical connection seems almost too perfect, doesn't it?
It certainly seemed perfect to 19th century genealogists. They were pretty much convinced there had to be a shared ancestor back in France, maybe just a generation or two before they migrated.
Makes sense they'd think that.
It does. But then members of this new Paltz-Dubois family, they generously agreed to participate in Y-DNA testing and the results. They delivered a very clear, very definitive no.
A flat no. So what exactly did the Y-DNA tell us that separated them so definitively?
Well, it showed that they belonged to a completely different deep ancestral clan, what we call a haplogroup.
Haplogroup. Okay, heard that term.
Our DuBose line, as we'll get into, belongs to R1b, which is, very typical for Western Europe, France included.
Right.
The new Paltz-Dubois line, however, belongs to a totally different haplogroup, something like maybe a J2 or an E1b1b, for instance. These generally point towards very distinct ancestral paths rooted thousands of years ago, maybe in the Near East or even North Africa, long, long before the surname Dubosc was even a concept.
Wow. Okay, that's not just a minor difference then. We're not talking about like a family split that happened 300 or 400 years ago in France. We're talking about branches on the human family tree that diverged maybe on a continental level millennia ago.
Exactly. And this is the real aha moment for anyone learning about this stuff. It shows why a shared name, even a shared experience like the Huguenot migration, it's just not enough evidence.
It proves they are genetically distinct families.
Totally distinct. And that really validates the need for a very precise, very focused DNA project dedicated only to tracing our specific DuBose lineage. The Y-DNA is the tool, the mechanism that lets us make that separation with scientific certainty.
Okay, so let's pivot then. We've used Y-DNA to separate the lines. Now, how do we use it to identify our own unique line? You mentioned Y-DNA as the key. For listeners who might not be familiar with the mechanics, how exactly does Y-DNA let us trace a connection across, what, more than 300 years now?
Right. Think of Y-DNA as like the genetic equivalent of a surname, but it's passed down biologically. It
Okay.
goes almost entirely unchanged directly from father to son, generation after generation after generation. Women, they don't carry the Y chromosome, so it's a purely paternal tracking tool.
Father to son only. Got it.
The only way the code really changes is through occasional, pretty random mutations. These mutations are incredibly rare events, statistically speaking. But when they do happen, they become these inherited markers, like milestones, really, along that long paternal path.
And these milestones, these mutations, are what let us trace ancestry deep, deep into history.
Precisely. So the DuBose DNA project, which is managed through Family Tree DNA, they specialize in this kind of testing. It uses advanced testing, specifically something called Big Y testing.
Big Y. Yeah.
And this analyzes tens of thousands of these potential genetic markers. Our initial finding, the very broad one, was that the DuBose line belongs to the major European paternal haplogroup R1b.
R1b. Now, that one sounds familiar. R1b is huge, though, isn't it? If
Yeah.
someone listening gets a basic test back today and it says R1b, that doesn't really tell them much more than, hey, your paternal ancestors were somewhere in Western Europe.
That's absolutely right, and it's a really important point for context. R1b is incredibly common across Britain, Ireland, France, Spain. I mean, it often dominates maybe 60 to 80% of the male population in those areas.
Wow.
This lineage really seems to have exploded in popularity maybe around 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. So, yes, finding R1b is consistent with the French origin for Isaac, but it doesn't get us to Isaac specifically, not even close.
See, it had to go deeper.
Much deeper. We had to trace the path down through the R1b tree, looking for much more recent, much more localized mutations that define our specific branchlet.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. How do you actually go from R1b, this massive ancient branch of the human tree, to identifying a single specific ancestor, Isaac, who lived over 300 years ago? What's the process?
Well, we rely on two main types of markers within the Y-DNA. First, there are things called STRs, which stands for short tandem repeats.
Well, 2 years, okay.
These tend to mutate a bit faster, maybe every few generations. They're really helpful for identifying closer genealogical cousins, like maybe finding matches out to your fifth or sixth cousins today.
Useful for recent connections.
Very useful. But to get all the way back to Isaac reliably, we need the more stable, long-term markers, SNPs. That stands for single nucleotide polymorphisms.
SNPs.
Yeah.
Okay, STRs and SNPs. What's the key difference between them in like practical terms for this kind of research?
Think of it like this. An SNP is a mutation where just one single letter in the vast genetic code, the DNA sequence, has changed. Let's say an A became a G at a specific location.
Just one letter change.
Just one. And crucially, once that change occurs, it almost never ever reverses back. It's incredibly stable over time.
Ah, okay, so it's like a permanent marker.
Exactly. And that stability allows us, using statistical models, to date when that mutation likely first occurred with pretty high confidence. We can estimate the TMRCA, or time to most recent common ancestor, for everyone who carries that SNP.
TMRCA.
Got it. So for our project, we traced our path down through the R1b tree, step by step, through more than 25 increasingly specific SNPs, each one representing a branch point further down the line. This whole process, honestly, it took years of dedicated research by the project members and administrators.
Wow, 25 steps deeper than just R1b. That's incredible dedication. And what was the final outcome? After all that intensive multi-year effort, what is the unique genetic fingerprint for our specific DuBose lineage?
The path eventually led us down to a unique, what we call a terminal marker for our line. The specific genetic fingerprint for the documented descendants of Isaac DuBose is RA7566.
RA7566. Okay, that sounds super technical, but you're saying that specific code holds centuries of history?
It absolutely does. This marker, A7566, it's so specific and relatively recent in the grand scheme of things that it effectively acts as the definitive genetic signature of our family line branching off from the larger DuBose tree.
How recent are we talking? When did the genetic models estimate that A7566 mutation actually happened?
Well, based on the current data, the mutation rates of surrounding markers, and the number of people tested, the estimated TMRCA for RA7566 is roughly, say, 400 to 500 years ago, give or take a bit.
400 to 500 years ago. That time frame, that aligns perfectly, doesn't it? It suggests a unique mutation that happened either in one of Isaac's direct paternal ancestors back in France, like his father or grandfather, or perhaps very shortly after his family settled in South Carolina.
Exactly. It fits the historical window perfectly. And what it means is, theoretically, every single male descendant in the direct, unbroken paternal line of Isaac DuBose must carry this specific RA7566 marker.
That is just profound.
Yeah.
But okay, now we hit the central challenge, right? How do we actually use this code, RA7566, to prove the connection all the way back to Isaac himself? He died in the early 18th century. How do we definitively tie this modern scientific finding to that specific historical person across 300 plus years?
Yes. This is where what we call the golden thread methodology comes in. It's all about linking the historical paper trail directly to the genetic trail. You need both working together.
The golden thread, I like that. So how did you actually manage that confirmation? How do you tie the SMP to Isaac?
It required careful planning and recruitment within the DuBose DNA project. We couldn't just test one person. We needed confirmation from multiple independent branches of the family, all tracing back to Isaac.
Different lines of descent.
Exactly. We specifically recruited several male participants who had, and this is crucial, absolutely flawless, meticulously documented paper genealogies tracing their lineage back. And critically, these men descended from different known sons of Isaac.
Oh, interesting. So not all from the same son.
Correct. For instance, we had men whose paper trails led directly back to Isaac's son Daniel. We had others whose paper trails led back to his son Stephen, and still others whose lines came down from his son John, all documented independently through historical records.
Okay, so you've got at least 3 distinct genealogical lines established the old-fashioned way through things like deeds, wills, census records,
Yeah.
and they all converge back on one man, Isaac.
That's the setup.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then comes the genetic confirmation. When all these men, descending from those separate historically confirmed branches, Daniel's line, Stephen's line, John's line, when they all took the most advanced Y DNA test, the big Y test,
Yeah.
and they all shared the exact same definitive terminal SNPRA 7566, well, that provided the scientific proof we needed.
Ah, I see. Because the only way for men descending from different sons, Daniel, Stephen, John, to all share the same relatively recent, unique marker.
Is if that marker, RA7566, belonged to their most recent common ancestor.
Which, according to the paper trail, is Isaac DuBose himself.
Isaac DuBose himself. The convergence of the paper trails and the shared unique genetic marker is the confirmation.
Wow. That is just incredible. It really is like having the ultimate quality control check on the historical research. The paper suggested the identity, pointed the way, and then the DNA came in and basically signed off on it, stamped it, confirmed.
It really is. It provides the highest level of genealogical certainty that's currently possible for these deep ancestral connections.
And the implications must be huge.
Oh, they are. Think about it. Historically, if someone found, say, a DuBose record from the 1750s in South Carolina, but they couldn't quite trace the paper trail back those last couple of steps to connect definitively to Isaac, well, that line often remained a frustrating brick wall.
Right, you hit a dead end.
Exactly. But now, that genetic signature, RA7566, it acts like a beacon. If any new male DuBose descendant tests today and finds they carried the specific marker,
Yeah.
they can be highly confident, even without having every single piece of paper perfectly lined up for 300 years, that they also descend paternally from Isaac DuBose. The marker becomes the proof of that connection to the established lineage.
That's amazing. It also works the other way too, right?
Yeah.
It allows us to filter out those who might share the DuBose name but aren't actually related to Isaac's specific line.
Absolutely. So if someone tests, maybe they find they are broadly R1b, but they do not possess the specific A7566 mutation.
Then they're likely part of a different DuBose family line.
Precisely. They're part of a parallel DuBose family, maybe one that stayed in France or migrated elsewhere or even originated in a different part of France altogether. but they aren't from our specific Santee River line founded by Isaac. It's a powerful negative confirmation, too, which is just as important for clarity as the positive one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The real beauty of identifying a marker like A7566 is that it helps delineate the specific Isaac DuBose lineage from potentially thousands of other Dubosc, Dubois, and DuBose families that likely existed across France and later in America. It carves out our unique branch.
Okay, RA7566 is clearly the golden thread, as you called it, for the direct paternal side, the father-to-son line. But let's step away from the Y chromosome for a minute. What if I'm a descendant, but maybe through a female line? Say my connection comes through Isaac's daughter or a granddaughter who married someone with a different surname. How is RA7566 relevant to me at all, other than just knowing it as historical context? I wouldn't carry that Y DNA marker.
That's the perfect question, and it highlights the limitation of Y-DNA. While it provides that incredibly deep, incredibly specific paternal lineage tracing, it really only covers one very narrow branch of your entire family tree, your father's 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 line, and so on.
Just one out of thousands of ancestors.
Exactly. So if you descend from a daughter of Isaac, or maybe a granddaughter who married out of the DuBose name, you're right, you won't carry that Y-DNA marker. To confirm those connections, and really to explore the other 99% of your ancestors, including all the female lines, we turn to a different type of DNA testing, autosomal DNA.
Right, and this is the kind of test that most listeners are probably more familiar with.
Yeah.
The ones from Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, or Family Tree DNA's Family Finder test, the ones that give you ethnicity estimates and cousin matches.
Exactly. That's autosomal DNA. And the key difference is that you inherit autosomal DNA from all of your recent ancestors, your father, your mother, your 4 grandparents, your 8 great-grandparents, and so on, back through all the lines.
Okay.
However, there's a catch. Because your DNA gets shuffled and essentially halved with each passing generation, you get half from mom, half from dad, the amount of DNA you share with any specific distant cousin drops pretty rapidly the further back you go.
Right, it gets diluted over time.
It does. And we measure this shared DNA, the amount you have in common with a match, using a unit called centimorgans, often abbreviated as CM.
Centimorgans. Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit like a nautical term or something. What does a centimorgan actually represent in this context? Is it like a length of DNA?
It's basically a measure of genetic linkage, yeah. You can think of it for genealogical purposes simply as representing the total length of the identical continuous segments of DNA that you share with relative. It's kind of like a clock ticking backward on your shared heritage.
Okay.
So, for example, you'd share thousands of centimorgans with a full sibling, maybe around, say, 850 sydenm on average with a first cousin. But by the time you get out to maybe 8th or 9th cousins, the amount you share typically dwindles down to 0, statistically speaking.
So there are practical limitations then. How far back can autosomal DNA reliably take us in confirming relationships?
Yeah, that's the key difference from Y-DNA. Autosomal DNA is absolutely brilliant for confirming relationships out to about the 4th or maybe 5th cousin level. Sometimes a bit further, sometimes less. There's some randomness.
So, ancestors from when?
That usually means your most recent common ancestor with that match lived sometime in the 19th century or maybe the early 18th century if you're lucky.
Okay.
So if you're trying to confirm an ancestor from, say, the 1850s, autosomal DNA is your absolute best bet. But if you're trying to confirm your heritage all the way back to the 1600s or 1700s, like with Isaac,
Y-DNA is the tool for that deep connection.
Y-DNA for the paternal line is really the only tool that can do that with high precision and certainty over that many generations. Autosomal just gets too diluted.
Gotcha. Okay, let's look at a specific example using autosomal DNA from the DuBose project then.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that this tool can help unite branches of Isaac's family tree that might have gotten separated over time, maybe by geography or just lost paper records.
Oh yeah, we have several really wonderful examples of this happening within the project, but one in particular nicely highlights the power of the centimorgan measurement. We identified a DNA match between 2 individuals who shared about 60 centimorgans of DNA.
60 centimeters. Okay, what does that typically suggest?
Well, according to the shared CM project data and statistical probabilities, sharing 60 CNM strongly suggests they are likely related somewhere in the range of, say, 3rd cousins once removed or perhaps 4th cousins. It points to a relatively recent shared ancestor.
Okay, so the genetics said, hey, you two are family, probably around the 4th cousin level. And then the genealogists had to step in and figure out how they were related using the paper trails.
Precisely. The DNA points you in the right direction. So, by comparing their known family trees, the paper trails they had each researched independently, we found the connection. One individual descended from Isaac's son, Daniel,
Okay.
and the other individual descended from Isaac's other son, Stephen.
Ah, so the common ancestors were Daniel and Stephen's parents.
Isaac and Suzanne DuBose. This is like the modern genetic version of finding two old deeds from the 1700s that mention siblings. You have two entirely separate paper trails, painstakingly researched, and now they are confirmed and linked together by one shared genetic signature found in their living descendants.
That's incredible. Their shared autosomal DNA provides living, measurable proof that the sibling connection between Daniel and Stephen, which was documented maybe centuries ago in some old Bible or will, is absolutely real and has persisted genetically down to today.
Exactly. It has to be an incredibly validating feeling for the researchers and for the individuals involved, too, to see that historical documentation, the stuff you find in dusty archives, suddenly validated by a high-tech lab report.
I bet. It must connect the dots in a way that paper alone sometimes struggles to, especially, like you said, when documents are damaged or lost or maybe never even existed for certain lines.
Absolutely. And for many people involved in these projects, these newfound cousins might live clear across the country. Maybe they never would have known each other existed. But the DNA brings them together, confirms the deep history they share, all tracing back to Isaac and Suzanne.
So if we try to synthesize everything we've covered today,
Yeah.
it seems like modern science, the DNA testing, it isn't about throwing out traditional genealogy at all. It's more about providing this incredibly powerful scientific backbone to, well, confirm and enhance it.
That's a perfect way to put it.
The paper trail suggests an identity, it tells the story, and then the DNA comes along and confirms that biological identity.
That really is the essence of this whole deep dive into the genetic material. Isaac DuBose left us a paper trail, yes. But that Y DNA marker, A7566, that's like the immortal, unchanging genetic thread that ties every single confirmed paternal descendant directly back to him across the centuries.
The golden thread.
The golden thread for the paternal line. And then the autosomal DNA that helps us weave together all the myriad other connections, the ones that run through the female lines and branch out to all the cousins scattered across the country today. It really is the ultimate QC check on our shared family history.
This is clearly incredible research and obviously the result of a huge amount of collaboration using both cutting-edge science and very rigorous traditional genealogy. We definitely want to take a moment here to acknowledge the massive debt that's owed to all the cousins who actually participated in this vital genetic genealogy research.
Absolutely crucial.
This foundational work, especially identifying and confirming RA7576, it simply would not have been possible without them being willing to, open up their lines to the research project.
It truly is a gift to the entire extended family, present and future. We really must acknowledge and specifically thank the individuals whose participation was key in establishing this definitive genetic picture of the Isaac DuBose lineage. People like John Allison DuBose, David Randolph DuBose, Frederick Townsend Coker Jr., Kimberly Jane DuBose, Mary Frances Harriet Coker, John Adrian DuBose, and Franklin Ross DuBose, among many, many others who have joined and continue to join the project.
Their courage, really, and their willingness to participate allowed researchers to definitively bridge that 300-plus year gap between Isaac and today. And I assume you continue to welcome more cousins to join the DNA project.
Absolutely. Especially those interested in the advanced big Y testing for the Y DNA side. The more relatives who test, particularly from different documented branches, the more focused and precise that genetic picture becomes. It helps refine the TMRCA estimates, identifies new sub-branches, and potentially could even help trace the line further back in France before Isaac.
So it's still a living research project.
Very much so. It's ongoing.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the genetic proof connecting us back to Isaac DuBose, maybe we can leave you, the listener, with one final thought. Something that builds on this fusion of science and history we've been talking about. While that Y DNA marker, RA7566, proves the scientific link back to Isaac, it's important to remember that science really only confirms one side of the coin, the biological connection. The stories, the reasons they migrated, the trials they faced, their religious convictions, those journeys across the American South.
The human experience.
Exactly.
That's it.
All of that is still locked primarily in the paper trail, in the historical context. Genetic proof isn't the end of the family story. In many ways, it's the beginning of a much deeper, more confident reading of the history we thought we knew.
That's a fantastic point. Well said.
Join us next time as we leave the lab coats behind again and step back into the 19th century. We're going to follow the family's next great migration, A journey that takes the many descendants of Isaac and Suzanne DuBose far beyond the familiar shores of the Santee River and deeper into the American landscape.